Hi guys, before we get started with this episode, I have to put out an apology because I mispronounced the name. As I was reading the script, I just read it out how it would be pronounced, completely forgot that I'd been listening to Brett speak about his people for about 2 hours and heard the correct pronunciation, and I just pronounced it as I would read it in English, and that was Métis, but that is incorrect, so let me correct myself. It is properly pronounced Métis. The Métis people, and it's a nation and not a tribe. So I made 2 mistakes on that. I wanted to apologize. I also want to point out a couple of things before we go into the interview, because today I'm just going to play through the recorded interview that I took. And at first I was going to group it into sections, but I think it came out so nice and just natural, just us talking, so I'm going to leave it like that. So I want to explain a couple of things beforehand. One being about the Métis people, because Brett's going to give a long explanation of some of those things. But first, I would like to acquaint you with a little bit of the history as a background. The other important issue is I've heard there have been some people critical of these filings of Brett's in this lawsuit. People saying he's piggybacking off of the lawsuit, all kinds of crazy things. That's not it. Now, you know that if you've already watched part 1, but I want to say it again in case people are seeing this one and haven't watched the last one. He has not tried to join this lawsuit between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively. He filed some documents to preserve evidence. He's had legal issues ongoing for years now, not only with Ryan Reynolds, but with Hugh Jackman. He's actually spoken to Leslie Sloane. He's had issues with Disney. He's had issues with Marvel. It's his own ongoing fight, and it includes multiple issues. Just one of his issues has to do with Deadpool and how Dogpool relates to his dog, amongst other things. There are quite a few videos out there that have been done about Brett and Eiko stories already. Leanne has spoken with them. She's interviewed both of them. She's got a long thread on X about their story. She came on a live with me once that Brett joined. Ashley has done a story of it, at least one, and now Mandy has done it as well. Those are the ones I know of. There may be more. And Eiko has a nice long thread on her ex as well. So there's a lot of different places to get more information about this lawsuit. But he's certainly not piggybacking. Once Marvel was joined to this suit, he saw a chance to have evidence preserved for his own lawsuit. That's why he filed. He's not trying to jump in on this lawsuit. It was just about evidence. Another thing people have been saying is that the judge removed his stuff from the docket. This is not true either. He filed a motion. The judge gave him instructions on how to file it correctly because there were a couple of adjustments that needed made. After the judge did that, it was removed from the docket. He refiled according to the judge's instructions. It showed up on the docket, and then people think it disappeared. It did not disappear. It got moved back to the prior date. So if you go and look on the docket, you will find it there. And since then, several new documents have hit that are still on there that you can go see. So the judge did not dismiss it, did not delete it. When it was filed incorrectly, he told him the correct way to do it and then accepted it once it was filed correctly. So if you hear anyone saying that, that is not true. Just remember, there are a lot of pro-Blake people out there, and the rumor is that quite a few of them are paid or employed in some way to do what they're doing, and they want to discredit anything and everything that they can. And they don't seem to mind misrepresenting the truth. So I wanted to clear that up before I went on. Now, let's talk about the Red River Métis people. They're a nation of Indigenous people in Canada. And like most Indigenous people, their story is sad. It's one of oppression. It's one of mistreatment and abuse. And one of Brett's big fights is to stop them from being erased. And Hollywood has done that time and time again. When a person was supposed to be an Indigenous person, they've been cast not using an Indigenous person, but anyone that they could put a little makeup on and stick in the role. That's erasure. That's one of the things Brett's fighting against. But here's their story. He's going to mention something called road allowance. He says they lived on road allowance. I wasn't familiar with what that means, and you may not be as well. So let's have a look. The road allowance period, roughly from 1900 to 1960, is a key but little-known element of Métis history and identity. As immigrant farmers took up land in the prairie provinces after the 1885 Northwest Resistance, many Métis dispersed to parkland and forested regions, while others squatted on Crown land used or intended for the creation of roads in rural areas or on other marginal pieces of land. As a result, the Métis began to be called the road allowance people, and they settled in dozens of makeshift communities throughout the three prairie provinces, such as Saskatchewan Spring Valley, along the fringes of Prince Albert National Park, Chicago Line or Little Chicago in the Qu'Appelle Valley, and Manitoba St. Madeleine and Roostertown, Winnipeg. Road allowance houses reflected the Métis' extreme poverty. Houses were usually uninsulated, and that's cold in Canada, roofed with tar paper and built from discarded lumber or logs and various recycled materials. These small 1- or 2-room dwellings housed entire families. Road allowance communities popped up in areas where there was temporary employment. The Métis worked for farmers picking rocks and roots, clearing trees, and doing other labor jobs. They were paid minimal wages or were paid with bits of food such as chicken, pork, or beef. As a result, they could not afford to buy their own homes or pay rent. Squatting on Crown land was one way of providing a home for the family. To supplement their meager income, many road allowance families picked Seneca root and sold it by the pound. They also picked berries, grew gardens, trapped and hunted game. Unfortunately, by 1939, laws were put in place making it illegal to hunt and trap out of season or without a license. Many Métis went to jail or had to pay expensive fines for hunting out of season. In many cases, the animals they were hunting were their only source of food. The road allowance Métis had a much lower standard of living than nearby Euro settlers. This poverty occurred well into the mid-20th century. As hunting and fishing regulations increased and government work projects failed, more Métis turned to government aid or relief to support themselves. Moreover, the Métis lived in a racist settler society that socially marginalized them, creating a myriad of social problems including poor health, low self-esteem, and a lack of viable employment opportunities. Road allowance Métis also lacked educational opportunities because children were not allowed to go to school if their parents didn't pay property taxes. As a result, 3 generations of Métis were unable to receive a basic education. These road allowance children who were allowed to attend schools were often teased and bullied about their customs, clothing, languages, and food. During the Depression, growing public pressure to deal with the Métis problem forced governments in the prairie provinces to act. As a result, in the 1930s and 1940s, the Alberta and Saskatchewan governments began to address the economic, social, and political marginalization of the road allowance people. Métis leaders in Alberta, such as Malcolm Norris, James Brady, better known as Jim Brady, and Peter Tompkins, convinced the Alberta government to enact the Métis Population Betterment Act in 1938, creating 12 Métis colonies, now known as the Alberta Métis Settlements, the only legislated Métis land base in Canada. Saskatchewan developed various Métis rehabilitation schemes, such as Métis farms and colonies and special Métis schools, although these were shut down in the mid-1950s. The dissolution of these road allowance communities began during the Depression. Through the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Act in 1935, community or co-opt pastures were created in rural areas, forcing many Métis out of their shanty communities. In places like Little Chicago, near Leastock, Saskatchewan, or St. Madeleine, Manitoba, road allowance Métis families were forcibly removed. In St. Madeleine, all the homes were burned down and the families were dispersed to make way for a community pasture. Despite being poor and facing racism on a daily basis, many Métis elders remember the good parts of life on the road allowance positively. People danced to lively fiddle music at house parties. They visited while picking berries and digging Seneca root. They told wonderful stories, and they enthusiastically celebrated New Year's. Michif was spoken among community members, and the elders provided a traditional education to the children. The Métis were independent and provided for their families the best they could. Community members helped one another, and families were close-knit. Even though life was difficult on the road allowance, many Métis elders look back fondly to a time when life was simpler and people looked out for one another. Even though they were poor, they were rich in so many other ways. So hopefully this bit of history will help you understand some of the things Brett refers to when he speaks in this interview. I hope you enjoy this chat as much as I did.
It's nice to meet you. Thanks for having us on.
You guys have great voices, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
To your podcast, and I was like, oh, they're going to sound so good. Yeah, not everybody has a voice for it. So.
Oh, thanks. It might also just be the audio setup because I have training in audio engineering, so we have good microphones.
First, I want to start with the list of the people that are involved and their relationship to the story. So this would include any of those creators that you knew in real life that then took your story and put it into these different things.
Allegedly, of course.
Could I get a quick list of cast of characters sort of thing?
Do you want me to handle that, Eiko? Or?
Sure. If you miss someone, I'll just jump in.
Okay. Well, so basically it kind of centers around our work in Montreal, which is, we worked around Ubisoft, and there's several people there that we're connected to, which include people who are connected to Jason Vanderberg, who has kind of indicated and said himself that many people believe the show Mythic Quest was based on him as a main character. And also Rob McElhenny, has another person that has admitted that he's researched in Montreal for that show while we're in Montreal.
And he's the one that owns Wrexham with
Ryan, yeah.
Right, okay.
And that's kind of how Ryan ties into this, because we, again, we know a bunch of people in Montreal. Eiko was very well known in the Montreal game scene. She was on stage with Ubisoft composers. She's the only woman on stage for her for one of the Montreal big anniversaries.
Video Game Symphony
Orchestra. That's the 275 year anniversary of Montreal, I think it was. And so it was a big publicized event, everyone in the city, everyone in games. So a big deal. I think even before Baldoni's co-host was actually at some of those Montreal events earlier on, and she's from Montreal herself.
And this piece stood out because it was one of the only ones with a choir.
I was also in Japanese.
And yes, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. It was in Japanese.
So.
And that's Mythic Quest?
That's Mythic Quest. And so Mythic Quest is Rob McElhenny. And then you kind of get into his relationship. So we had some issues earlier on with one of the episodes. And the thing about Mythic Quest is it has one of the same concept artists as Free Guy and Deadpool and Wolverine.
William Roby, who was the concept artist for Mythic Quest, Free Guy, and Deadpool and Wolverine.
So he was all three of those: Mythic Quest, Free Guy,
Deadpool, Wolverine. Right. He was specifically the episode of Mythic Quest where called Everlight, which we've made some connections between our work, and that's all allegations in our own opinion, not to meant to be legal fact at this point. But yeah, so he is directly involved in every project we're arguing references us in some way. There's another brother.
Thomas Elder
Groby
is his brother.
We believe they're brothers. They have the same last name. They have a lot of project overlap. So they've been involved with the X-Men franchise way back. So these guys have been concept artists for this group of people for probably almost 20 years now, I think.
Oh, wow.
And there's also ties with Groby with my ex-husband, who's a fairly prominent visual effects artist that works on Marvel IP.
Yeah, well, he was on Deadpool and Wolverine. He was on Free Guy. So it's not a very there's not a lot of distance between
right. Okay, with your ex-husband.
I'm not sure if he actually works with him. There's just connections.
There's a lot of project overlap between them.
Okay.
Not just on Deadpool and Wolverine, because her husband wasn't on Mythic Quest, but not just on Free Guy. They're overlapping on other projects, so they're in the same kind of professional circle. He was working from home from Marvel, and
he was actually one of the first ones working from home. So, and I believe he told me he was the first one that became staff before everyone was on contract.
And yeah, this is the same Chris who's on Chris Nichols, who's on Free Guy and on Deadpool and Wolverine. And he also has some project overlap with William Groby.
So another thing is that my ex, he was working at Digital Domain. I'm not sure if he still works there in Vancouver, but he was one of the first employees to become staff. And they let him work from home in the same room as I was composing, because I was working from home as well. And he would oftentimes ask for my input on his work because I'm also a classical trained visual artist. Protocols at Marvel is quite strict So there's a chance that they knew that I was helping him. I'm not sure.
Saying that security protocols may have dictated some kind of knowledge or overlap, or that security may have taken a look into, or there was some potential knowledge arising at that time.
Because at the time he was working on Thanos.
Yeah, that was actually the time he was actually working on Thanos when you had your experience at GDC.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And you have Thomas Eldergrove, who actually goes all the way back to X-Men Origins Wolverine. So this guy has been there at the beginning of the relationship between Hugh and Ryan. So it's the distance that we have from this in our inner circle is minute. And that's without even going to the fact that I was on set with him. And like funny thing is, I got invited on set after I started, when I was actually with Eiko, like when I was in a relationship with Eiko, because I normally didn't do that type of work. So it was actually really random that I was asked to do it, because I don't normally do that type of work.
I was actually helping Chris with the visual direction of some of his work while he was working at home, because I'm also a trained classical artist. And I work from home as well on composition. So oftentimes we'd just be working in the same room. So I know that Marvel has very strict
security policies, and rightfully so, when it comes to leaking, because there was major issues with like X-Men Origins having leaks, and there was argument that it really affected the box office. So they've been pretty strict since then, because spoilers. Right?
So it could be possible that they knew that I was helping him. Just speculation.
Like they could have been listening and watching?
I wouldn't. Again, I'm not going to speculate on the security practices at the time, because that's not something I'm going to do. But it would not be unreasonable if I was, because I have a background in private investigation and actually military intelligence. I was a member of the Canadian Forces 6 Intelligence Company. So I'm speaking with sense of understanding. Basically, I would, if someone was working at home for a company of mine, I would double check their spouse if they had any connection. So I would do some due diligence relating to it, especially if I'm letting someone work from home for the first time. So it's just a situation where there might be some hypothetical early contact in this case.
Interesting.
I mean,
I could totally see that, because they're working, they're trying to keep things secret.
Yeah. I mean, that would be part of reasonable due diligence. But I mean, the thing is, like, Eiko was working on, again, this is kind of funny too, because Eiko was working on a video game called Earthlog, and there was a dog named Taika on it. And so then you have Taika Waititi on Free Guy.
Okay, so let's get into this then.
Sure.
So how did you first cross paths with these people?
Oh, can I say one thing just really quick first?
Oh, yeah.
We're not paid by Ryan Reynolds or anyone at his camp. No one is paying us, because like I've had that come up a couple times in line. They're like, "You're paid by Reynolds." I'm not paid by Reynolds. I've been raising concerns about this since 2001. And we've been filing different complaints since 2001, including with Disney and with Marvel.
That's a long time.
Yeah. We've been bringing, and we already brought up Dogpool and Nicepool before the New York Times article about Justin Baldoni came out. So there are receipts that we were raising this issue before it became public record. So I'm basically, in this case, I'm seeking discovery materials so we can report our own cases. And that's my intention of filing, is because there's been an ongoing issue we're trying to resolve, and the discovery could mention my name and do specific things that if I'm not looking at it, people are not going to notice these things, and it could become sealed, or it could be taken out of the public record, and that could damage my rights. So that's why I'm here.
Right.
And we're aware of the implications of it, but that's just what it is.
So I think if we just kind of go through this document is kind of what I had in mind.
Sure.
And you tell your story as it goes. I just wanted the background of some of the people involved. And if you want to leave their names out of it, we don't have to say anybody's names that you don't want to say. So we'll keep this as discreet, because I know with you having this potential lawsuit, we don't want to do anything that's going to endanger that. So I wanted to start first on the first page.
Yep.
So it mentions, or page 6, in the introduction, it mentions that you served a preservation letter. So can you explain to everyone what a preservation letter is and why you want this served?
It's basically just a do not destroy information. So it's just, they can't go through their routine destruction practices in relation to anything involving us or anything we're connected with Dogpool. So just because they're, getting information and because Baldoni filed, it triggered my need to file on this because as they're going through information, I have to make sure certain records are preserved that are in my interest. And that's basically it so I've served them privately with preservation orders. So it's just basically don't destroy evidence relating to me and hold on to it until it becomes relevant at a later time.
The racialized retaliation and reputational harm, ensuring that unauthorized uses of his and his spouse lived experiences, likenesses, and protected disclosures in derivative media content are fully and fairly addressed in Discovery. Can you explain that paragraph for us all?
Sure. And again, this is all allegation in my own opinion, and it's not meant to be a legal fact. Okay, so this is where it kind of becomes a difficult circumstance because, and this might take a bit of a longer story to explain it. Would you agree, Eiko?
Yes, I think so.
So this is
take your time. If this ends up long, I'll cut it into multiple parts.
Okay.
I want you guys to be able to tell your full story as you want to tell it.
Okay, so this is a good starting point. So basically, we were working on a game called Valiant Mirror, and it was Eiko's way to take back her career and livelihood after a really, really rough time at GDC. My mother sent me a video from the show called Mythic Quest, and she said, "You need to watch this." And so she identified that they referenced Eiko, and that was her words, not mine. She identified Eiko in one of the episodes. And so that was a massive shock, right? Like it was because we looked into it, we found they're tied to Montreal, and we were trying to, figure out what was going on because it was a very specific reference. And then we found more and more in the show that seemed to be connected to either social media we've done or experiences in Montreal. It's all allegations, till eventually we got to Everlight. And that episode, a lot of that was overwhelming. And, it had a Wrexham shield, which we didn't identify at the time. We had no idea that Rob was connected to Ryan in any way, shape, or form. And we were just blindsided by this situation. So, but it was one of those things where it's like, well, there's this company in Montreal that was there at GDC when Eiko reported her drugging. There's not to make allegations against the company, but it definitely was like, what is going on?
Oh, is that when you were drugged?
Okay, so I'm just going to tell you what I recollect.
Okay.
So near the end of the day, our boss let us, grab a drink from the open bar, which was very close to our booth. So I had a thermo, Final Fantasy 15 thermo that was easily identifiable, and I usually got like a dry martini.
And you've been carrying around that all day?
All day.
Yeah.
So I pour the martini into my thermo because I don't want people to think I'm, having a drink, right? And the thing is that I kept the cap off because, alcohol tastes different however it hits your tongue. So I had the cap on because it tasted bad with it coming out of that little tiny spout. So it was the end of the day, and my coworker said, "Oh, you have a fan. He wants to talk to you." So I placed the thermo behind the television where we hid all our stuff, like hand sanitizers and tissues or whatever, so it wouldn't look bad on the display. Then I went to go talk to him. It only lasted maybe a minute or two. And then my coworker was saying, the awards are on in the other building. We have to run. So I just downed the drink, and then I ran with him to the award ceremony. And that's around 30 minutes after, 30 minutes after, that's when I started feeling the effects. And the thing is that, like, I'm not lightweight. I'm 5'9". I'm not underweight. I'm a Newfie Japanese. Like, I know how to hold my liquor, right? That was just one drink, and I started feeling the effects. Ubisoft was very close to my booth at the time, and we were right at the edge of Stone Castle was right at the edge of a major, like, pathway. So there's a lot of traffic.
Well, you can check the plans. Games from Quebec, which is tied to Ubisoft Montreal, it was in the same room, was nearby. It was right by the Nordic kind of tables. And Jason Vandenberg, who the show was allegedly based on.
Let me jump in.
Yep.
Snow Castle is a Nordic company based in Norway, Oslo.
So basically, Jason Vandenberg was actually at the conference in GDC. And so, we get to an episode of Everlife that seems to be based on this guy, and then has a character named Eiko, which is just how AI pronounces Eiko because AI can't pronounce it.
But it's also pronounced Eiko as well.
Yeah. And they do both. And it's about this Jason Vandenberg guy. It's at a game convention, and it's a sexual character going, she'll do whatever you want. And it's like, oh, that's...
And there's a guy with an ankle monitor too, and everyone's asking, what's that for? He's about to answer, and they're like, I don't want to know.
And so that's allegedly sus as hell.
Like, even my mother, when I showed her the photo of Eiko from Mythic Quest, she was like, that looks just like you.
Yeah, no, it's
Wow.
Several people have been like, that's messed up, because it's not like there's a ton of Japanese game developers in Canada named Eiko, especially in Montreal. I think she's like the only Japanese.
That's very specific.
Yeah, it's easily, in my opinion, it's easily identifiable as Eiko to that whole community.
Well, I've had people in the industry point it out. They even knew what I was talking about. They brought it to me. So other people knew about this before we found out.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's other people that are like, hey, this is your story. So you didn't come across it yourself even.
No.
It was other people that recognized something's off with this.
No, we were busy and crunch on a video game. Like, we were trying to big Valiant Mirror. We were too busy for this stuff.
On page 7, I don't know if you guys are looking at the document too.
Mm-hmm.
It mentions reputational, privacy, or cultural harms.
Yeah, that's...
So,
sorry, I didn't interrupt. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was just going to ask you to explain.
That's kind of where we got to follow the chain of events to get there, so it'll make sense. This is, again, you got to put yourself in our position where we're just suddenly this is dropped on us. I'm like, it's what is going on, right?
Yeah, I think the important thing to say is that because Brett worked with Ryan, and at the time he helped a local Vancouver woman find a teddy bear.
Yeah, some mother gave it before she died. It was like a really sweet thing.
Oh,
So
I remember that story.
Yeah, so he was like, well, why don't you go on Twitter and ask for his help? What's the harm? Like,
what could go wrong?
What could go wrong? And I was like, I don't know. Okay, there's no harm. So I'll just ask for his help publicly.
Yeah.
And we didn't know about his connections with Rob
Didn't
at the
know
time.
a thing about Rex.
Like, I didn't even know who Rob was because I didn't watch Sunny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know it was an actor. I saw the name when I was looking up information about Wrexham.
Yeah.
But I've never watched the show. I had no idea who he was. I didn't know he was famous.
I would say they're more of a cult show. But they're famous, but he's really known for that. But anyways, I was never a Sunny fan myself, but like, it's something you know about as one of those cult shows, right? But I didn't think of it. And then the thing came out where after we asked for his help, and then I kind of went online. I started going after Rob because I'm kind of like, what's going on? Like, you got to explain this because this is insane. Like, allegedly, it was just such a weird circumstance that we wanted answers. And then Ryan puts out this whole Deadpool and Cork Reacts video, and that
you're missing one piece.
What
of
am I missing?
The thing is that because allegedly Rob was taking from us, you called him out on one of our social media videos.
Oh yeah, I called him on a social media, I think, but I also spoke with Megan Gantz, who's one of the Megan Gantz's agent, who is
manager,
who is one. We're at Burlstein, and I have texts coming from them, and they actually called me back, and it was I confronted them about what was going on with this because it just. I just couldn't figure out what's going on to begin with, to be honest.
After you saw the Mythic Quest episodes?
Yeah. So we reach out to them. Yeah. And that's the thing is her husband is actually one of the managers at Wrexham. So he's actually heavily involved in Henry Kerr. So he's heavily involved in Wrexham.
Not only that, he plays a character in Mythic Quest that has a very similar likeness to Brett and background.
Where he's like ex-military. He had a back issue. And that was really freaky because like, I actually had a small back fracture, and I just healed that before going to Montreal. And I think people in Montreal knew that. Like it's one of those things I talked to people about, and that was like a very specific detail from someone who's a programmer. It's funny because the character actually sends this programmer to the basement, like Justin Baldoni, and that's a whole other question. But yeah, sorry.
I try to encourage all the employees to make exercise a daily part of the routine. It's good for creativity. Might be good for you too. I mean, with that bad back of yours. You see, Paul, As you grow older...
Oh, I actually injured my back when I was 21.
21? Must have fallen down after your first beer.
Oh.
I'm just joshing you.
No, an RPG hit our armored personnel carrier outside Basra. It punched a fist-sized chunk of shrapnel into my spine.
Fist size, you say?
Ian also has a back injury.
Yes.
What, Eiko?
It's also magical realism too, right?
Oh yeah, he goes into magical realism. And I was out in I got this random invite that I still haven't explained, out to Berlinale. I just got like out of nowhere, the Canadian Embassy says, "Hey, come to this party in Berlinale." And so of course it's right with the pandemic. I hop on a flight, I go to Berlinale, and I'm talking to everyone about magical realism. Studio Shawada, we did a lot of magical realism, and that's magical realism is usually what I write.
Mhm.
And Mountain Berlinale, I was going to do this movie with Hanno Lentz, who did Das Widerja, which is like Look Who's Back, which was like a parody of like basically Adolf Hitler coming back to society and its impact on Germany. And this is around the same time, Taika is working on like Jojo Rabbit, and so it's kind of that overlap. And I've been in correspondence with this guy for a while, and we were looking at doing a project called Four Drunken Nights out in Germany. And we have been working that since the pandemic. But
Now remember, these clips are all from the same episode. And last time I showed you the clip of him being sent to the basement. Now that we know that Brett's really into magical realism as something that he writes, and there's a book that's known for that, 100 Days of Solitude. He hurt his back, he was formerly in the military, and the fact that he's indigenous. Let's watch the next scene.
Sure, he's big, but the big ones are always dumb. Trust me. Here, check this out. Hey, Paul, what's the last book you read?
Esto sería 100 años de soledad en su lengua materna.
Huh?
100 years of solitude. Sorry, I'm reading it in the original Spanish. I thought I heard you talking to Maria earlier, so I thought you...
Cool.
I thought you spoke Spanish.
I do speak Spanish. That wasn't Spanish.
I'm pretty sure that was Spanish.
If it was some kind of weird dialect. They have a lot of indigenous tribes, and I think the locals...
Should I be taking notes?
No. Don't write any of that down, Joe.
basically, it was just some of the strangest thing, because, that was something that I was known for in the community, and it was a little bit specific, and it was very unnerving, to say the least.
So that shows up in Mythic Quest as well?
Yes, it does.
And not to mention Poppy as well, who has my wardrobe and similar glasses to GDC, the only public photos that I have.
Which is
when I got drugged, allegedly.
Which
I believe I was drugged.
You know your reaction to alcohol, what one drink will do to you compared to feeling really, really sick after you drink something.
Yeah, it was very unusual because I've never been drugged before then. And when I reported to the GDC staff, they said they've never heard of this happening. So they told me that I was the first one. So I just want to make everyone know, aware that Brett is Red River Métis, which is one of the 3 indigenous groups in Canada.
Yeah.
I saw that.
That means like Native American, but it's just, it's just different. We're a culture that was emerged through the mixture of European culture and like several different like First Nations, like different like Native American tribes. And so we have different aspects of all those tribes mixed with different aspects of like French and Gaelic culture, kind of mixed together with our own languages as references. We actually have our own language, customs, traditions. So we're actually a nation that emerged through collaboration.
And this is a very important thing to remember. In fact, for further on to answer your question, is that a lot of Red River Métis people are passing.
Well, so sometimes you can't tell if someone is a River Métis just by looking at them. So because, and that's even going back, there's always been a variety of different skin colors, because we all don't have the same degree of European heritage or indigenous heritage. But what was there is that we had the community language and culture. So that's kind of it. So a lot of people don't know someone's actually Métis, and a lot of us have had to hide it for a very long time. It's one of those things where we actually had to be in the closet about it for a very long time, because, we had our identity stolen. And, if you spoke up about it or you identified with the community, you risked having your children taken. There's one story with my grandmother. Wow. It was really bad, actually. It was like my grandfather grew up in a road allowance out in Jasmine, Saskatchewan. You know, he didn't have a birth certificate until like the 2000, right? But you know, was one time his grandmother was there, and he's raised by his grandmother, who was mostly Cree. He was going to get his pension from the railway that he worked for, and he just was getting his birth certificate, and he said, "Yeah, I'm Métis, and he just said that on the birth certificate, and his grandmother just had a panic attack, was screaming, and was trying to grab the paper out of the clerk's hands to prevent him from like admitting on a record that he was actually Red River Métis, because she was afraid that
her history, she knew when she was young, probably
his pension. And it's you know, there were people living on road allowances until like the early 2000s, and that was because like we had all of our land basically taken. Like most of downtown Winnipeg, the surrounding areas, like we all lived on there for generations, had farms on it. And then when kind of Canadian government established its presence here, it just basically redistributed land and created a corrupt script program that kicked us off our land. They would trick people out of it, and they'd force people out of it. And there was a thing called the Reign of Terror. After there was a leader named Louis Riel who was eventually executed unjustly by Canada and is now considered a hero. He was considered a traitor for a long time in Canada, but now he's considered a hero. Basically, it's the Northwest Rebellion, and it resisted this like theft of land, because you know you had First Nations people who were starving out in Alberta, and the Métis would go all the way to like the edge of British Columbia, because we had like long trade routes, and so you had this context where like the First Nations people are starving, and starvation is being used as a tool to clear the plains by the Canadian government, and they're going and taking like the land that we have here, and like one of my ancestors, like he's one of the best farmers. Like you look at his actual records, he was the highest producing Métis farmer. And your fence post is broken, so we kick you off your land. And so it didn't matter what you did. It just became a system to legitimize that removal, and we stood up from it. And as a result, you know, we got pushed out and displaced from Manitoba because there was real threats of like physical assault, and like gendered violence was a big thing. And that continued for a very long time. And so we had to live on something called road allowances usually, or if we're passing enough, trying to sneak in and just enough to get a job and be able to stay out of it. So it's a really traumatic history. And it, like I said, it goes before like the railroads in like the late 1880s, 1890s. There were really no European women in Northwest Canada. It was a majority Indigenous population. And that changed very quickly after the Red River Rebellion. And so that kind of comes back to the situation where, sorry, Eiko, you want to say something?
Just listening.
And so that kind of comes back to this, because that's a big history in Canada. And it's been really a hard struggle to get people to talk about it. And like, it was such a rough thing that even like Métis veterans coming back from World War II, right? Like, they were told they weren't given the same support as any of those soldiers. They're told, go back to trapline. Like, it was difficult to even vote or get children in school for a long time because we were forced to live on road allowances. So we wouldn't even be registered for the school. Like, my grandpa didn't speak English until like he was 7 years old and had to have it changed out in the school.
If people want to learn more about the treatment of Red River Métis people, there's actually a film. Do you remember what it's called?
That's that film where she kind of looked like with that actress. I can't remember her name. She looks like my mother.
Yeah, she does.
Passing is a really good movie if you want to kind of understand a lot of the Métis experience. But
that would probably educate people more on the treatment of Red River Métis people.
It sounds very similar to the stories of Indigenous people here, but it sounds like it happened more recently still in Canada than here. Like, ours is pretty far back. But if this was like your grandparents, that's a lot more recent.
Well, it's not even grandparents. Like, I've dealt with it like in different ways growing up. Like, you understand, where I grew up in Manitoba, it's like something like we have one of the highest Indigenous populations in Canada. So it's like a really rough, can be a really rough racist environment. And because you're passing, like, you'll just be minding your own business, and then it'll just get dumped on you. And people will just go off on really racist rants about things. You kind of got to make the decision whether you say something and people turn on you, or you kind of got to just like internalize it. And so it's like, I grew up, my mother took me to Sweat Lodge, and I was connected. My grandfather's a fiddler. Like, I was connected. Like, I'm not someone who just magically became Indigenous or just rediscovered it. But that was something I grew up with.
You grew up with. Yeah, most of us we've lost it here in the States. There's some few and far between tribal areas where they try to keep it alive. But from my mother's side, my grandpa's Irish, but my grandma had Choctaw Indian and Cherokee.
Oh.
But if you go back so far, it's really hard to trace, because what happened is people were given the option to take a so-called Christian name and give up their indigenous names.
I think
And
you're
so-
actually sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
That's actually, now we're getting to the meat of the problem, because the reality is that's created a kind of a major conflict in the Indigenous community, especially the Indigenous media community, that I am actually very involved with. Because there's been a lot of cases like Sasheen Littlefeather, who can't trace her heritage, right? Or didn't have connection to a living tribe. And you have a bunch of people who will take Indigenous roles by saying that, and it doesn't turn out that they do have direct living connections to the traditions and stuff. And so traditions kind of get lost, forgotten, pushed away. And
Right.
there's also a lot of people who do that in bad faith. Like, I've been in a big online argument with Callie Reeves, because like there's a lot of people that question the credibility of her relationship with Indigenous people. And that's I'm not going to get into that, but like there's a lot of issues. Like Heather Ray's one that came up. She's a very influential person in Indigenous media, and she's admitted she doesn't have Cherokee heritage because she couldn't connect to it at all. And so you have a lot of people who end up being able to get positions in Indigenous media in Hollywood that don't really have direct connections to tribes. And like for me, I'm like directly connected to tribal membership. Like there's no question that I'm connected to that, and that I inherit those traditions and I actually relate to those things. Other people, when they don't have that, it's this thing where they tend to get prioritized because they don't really have the intergenerational trauma. Like they don't really have to live with that. And so it creates a bias for people who hasn't actually really had to deal with it, and they can kind of jump in. And there's like lots of issues with this. And this is kind of where this is how it threads together, because there is just a ton of pressure, because you go to even things, and this is, we're going to get into it, because Lionsgate Films was also the ones who made Twilight. And
Mythic Quest.
And Mythic Quest, as well as Another Simple Favor. And so when you bring that together, and yeah, you get right into it, is that this show, like one of the main, like Taylor Lautner, I think his name is, he doesn't have an official, as far as I can tell, there's no tribe that claims him. And so he's saying, I'm Indigenous, I'm connecting to all these things. And people are like, well, there's a lot of people that say that in bad faith in order to get access to Indigenous spaces, and in order to get access to Indigenous jobs, which ends up pushing Indigenous people further out of the narrative, further out of the conversation. And it ends up further erasing us when we're trying to, like, preserve our language. Like, I'm so busy dealing with this that I'd rather be like learning my own language and improving it. But this conflict this is exactly what that kind of thing creates. And so the problem with this is that if you go back, and this is something I didn't know when I first started this, you go back with like Ryan, you go back to like The Proposal, which, he looks as nice pull and goes, I can gently tap the fourth wall too. The Proposal, that might reference Baldoni's thing, but also references a movie he did called The Proposal with Sandra Bullock that actually erases Indigenous people. And it actually has kind of like Betty White does a dance.
That dance.
Yeah. A lot of people found that very racist. And in the original script, it was supposed to be his grandfather who actually had connections to the tribe. And Ryan's character was supposed to actually be kind of mixed. He's supposed to be kind of like part Indigenous. And where it's actually situated, it's a very prominent Indigenous area. And there was no Indigenous people in the entire film. So it created an entire erasure for it. And you go, and then like and so that's kind of where you realize, once we started getting into this, there was some stuff beneath the surface, because it doesn't seem like an accident that this has suddenly happened to, someone who has that background, and it's very like, and people know it. And they know it, especially because, Eiko's family has some connections to people who were making claims about Métis heritage that weren't actually Métis. Her brother was a private chef for Jason Momoa when he was filming out in Newfoundland for many years. He's claimed Native American heritage, but he doesn't really ever confirm it. He's Hawaiian, like he's Maori, I think, but he's got that connection. But like, I would never claim Maori connections, right? I would never claim that. Even Dwayne had one of his cousins who did a thing called White Buffalo, and he was being criticized for claiming Mi'kmaq heritage. And he actually did come out, and Dwayne did say, I didn't have any Mi'kmaq heritage. And his his cousin did say, no, I don't have it. And I apologize. And I'm going to try and move forward. And I had a bit of a chat with him online, and like that was all settled. He did things in a good way. Right. So people got to understand, with all of these projects, especially with something that's set in, like X-Men Origins is set in a time when there was really no European women, except the whole thing is represented as entirely European. And so you're looking at this in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, the issue with slave plantations. And so it becomes a question of how someone's acting for public relations purposes, allegedly, in relationship to accountability for potentially racially charged choices. So, and that deepens because these issues were raised with Leslie Sloane, most like who has corresponded with me. They're raised with Disney. And they're raised in a way reasonably Ryan ought to have been aware that my issue was largely because of this. And so it's when the dog pool and the nice little thing continued, it continued in the context of this conversation. So that's why I bring that up.
Okay, got it. So on page 9, under the subheading, Inclusion by Taylor Swift's Representation via Venable. So the second paragraph, it says, this confirms that my identity and disclosures were known to Swift's legal team and considered potentially relevant. Accordingly, I respectfully request access to any such documents referencing my name, disclosures, likeness, or prior preservation request. So how did this part all come to be? Can you give us some background on this one?
Well, I mean, in a Venable's filing, they listed me as interested party. And this was after I first sent a letter to Zona Judge Lineman just to talk about my inclusion, just for the purposes of preserving information. And it was stricken, and he asked me to refile. And so I had no standing at the time when Ms. Swift's firm actually filed this. So it brought questions. Well, I have no standing. Why are you including me? And so that goes, well, it's entirely possible at that point and reasonable to conclude that there may be some potential that I mentioned in some of these, in what's being potentially requested in relationship to dog pool and nice pool. And so I felt that justified my inclusion, and it justified filing as a result because, as again I said, I had no standing when this was filed.
Like this is not coming from nowhere. Like during the time this started, like right at the release of Free Guy, I blogged Ryan Reynolds. Immediately within 24 hours, I had 2 Free Guy fan accounts follow me.
Interesting.
And then when I unblocked him, because I felt like he was allegedly sending me a message that I can still look at your stuff.
Right. Blocking is pretty much useless because people just make like that. They make new accounts, or they already have new accounts.
Exactly. But then when I unblocked him, I did not have access to his stories. So he prevented me from looking at his stories, which is
wow, I didn't even know
kind
you
of
could do
odd.
that.
Yeah, Ryan's actually retweeted Eiko to like millions of people already. Like, so it's not as if they've not had online interactions already.
So the reason why...
So you two were definitely known to Ryan Reynolds.
Yes, and the reason why I bring up Free Guy is because, in our opinion, we allege that Free Guy actually took what happened to us in Mythic Quest and used that narrative for Free Guy. So I'm going to let Brett explain because he's a little bit more articulate than me when it comes to recalling.
Well, no, and this is, in my opinion, allegations not legally founded. Not a legal accusation, I mean. But basically, you have 2 video game developers that have secret feelings for each other. During Montreal, we were in a relationship, but we wanted to keep that private because I was concerned that people would attribute Eiko's work to me. And so we kept that private so that she could take credit for it. But that's a very specific detail that was, with Keys and Millie. And then the issue is the character Antoine, played by Taika, is very reminiscent of like Jason Vandenberg. Like it's very similar. The 2 characters between Mythic Quest and Antoine from Free Guy are very, very similar characters, very similar style, and they're really cut from the same cloth.
Let me jump in. So the character that Rob plays in Mythic Quest, Ian, is alleged to be based on Jason Vandenberg.
Which Jason Vandenberg has said in podcasts himself.
Taika, who plays Antoine in Free Guy, was the person who stole the IP from Million Keys.
And remember,
and Antoine resembles Ian or Jason Vandenberg, in our opinion.
And remember,
Mhm.
this is the same concept artist from Mythic Quest to Free Guy.
Interesting.
And so the story is about game developers, two indie game developers who have secret feelings for each other, who have their IP stolen and integrated into something else. In our opinion, that's pretty much a description of what happened with Everlight. And
Wow.
so that's right in there. And, you know, there's a Wrexham Shield right in that episode too. And so that just ties the whole thing together with that one. And that is uncomfortable.
And not only that, Ryan did say he thinks it was based on a true story.
Yeah. He said,
Yeah, I clipped that. Yeah.
So
Interesting. So tell us again who Jason Vanderberg is.
Jason Vanderberg is the
Creative director.
For the game For Honor, which was a Ubisoft production that involved like Viking, samurai, and knights kind of having battles. And it was used as the basis for Mythic Quest Raven's Banquet as the game, and used in the actual first season of Mythic Quest for the game they were using. So it's not even like it's not like separate. They have someone that looks like the game developer of For Honor, and they use For Honor in the first season as the game they're working on.
Wow.
So
And how does he feel about this looking like he's the character in these things?
he's made some comments about it. We can link you
You said
to.
he's talked about it on his
Oh,
podcast?
No, he went on a podcast and he talked about it. So he's talked about it publicly.
Oh, okay. Wow, this is so crazy. And you said before when we did the live together, you talked about how small and how tight the community actually is in Canada
Yeah.
for developers and these kinds of people. So you all know each other and know of each other, correct?
Yeah. And it's funny because I want to make another note. Jason Vandenberg was actually he actually left Ubisoft after GDC 2017, I think.
Right after
Right after what
the
went down.
incident. Yeah, right after the
And
incident.
not making allegations he was tied to it. I'm just telling you the timing. But he was also part of a documentary called Playing Hard about For Honor. And he worked with a guy named Popey. And so everyone in Montreal knew Popey. But then in Mythic Quest, it becomes Poppy. And it suddenly becomes an Asian developer. So it's so clearly rooted in the scene. And it's just, yeah. So
You know what? I'm going to say this, my own observation. Blake and Ryan, they don't appear to have any original idea of their own. I feel like everything they do now is stolen.
no.
They want to be seen as these. Yeah, this is just me speaking here. I want to clarify that it's from my observations. They want to be seen as these great authors, these great writers, that they do it all. They produce, they act, they write, they direct. But they don't seem to have, in my opinion, actual creative ability. So when you want this kind of, I hate to use this word now, I hate this word because every time I hear it, I think of Blake now, but they want authorship so bad. And these are people who, he has a production company of his own. He bought her, or she bought, I don't know, her own production company. And they sit there without, hers is completely blank. She's had the same projects that are supposed to be coming out of there just sitting there for years, like a minimum of like 5 years, and nothing being done for people who want this kind of authorship. They want all of it. They don't want to just act. They want to write. They want to choose the wardrobe. They want to produce. They want to direct. They want all of this. If you are a truly creative person and you have the money, you have the company, and you're not doing it, then something's wrong with you. Like you don't have the ability to actually, from the ground up, do this yourself. Because to me, it's ridiculous. Why did she have to go steal Justin's movie? If she wanted PGA credit, if she wanted to choose everything, direct everything, rewrite everything, why not just use your own company and do that? The only reason you don't, when you have all of that available right at your fingertips, is because you don't have the ability to do it yourself. She needed someone else's box cake. She needed the script already written. She needed the set already there. She needed everything in place, the location selected, the crew all set up. And then she could come in and just do like the garnishings of someone else's hard work, someone else's actual creation. And then she wants to take credit for it, which is, to me, exactly how her baking and her movie making are the same. The whole point was Blake and Ryan both, they want to be viewed as these brilliant writers, brilliant directors, brilliant producers, brilliant production team, but they need other people's work to do it. They're not capable of doing it from the ground up by themselves. Did I lose you? Oh,
no, I got that.
So just like what you're saying with these things, with Free Guy and Deadpool, Ryan wanted the credit of making these movies, but he didn't have his own original thought. He needed to take other people's lives to make a story, is what I'm collecting from this.
Well, if I can kind of jump in, and I'm not being partial. I try to be as fair as possible, because it's like, there's a thing I follow called Wakotuin. It's the Cree concept of law, which means do things in a good way. And so try to be fair. Like, I think when you're also at that level of fame, I think people are terrified of falling flat on their face, and also terrified of exposing themselves and not being enough. I mean, that's I guess that's exactly what Baldoni meant.
There you go.
Eiko and I've been debating what does being enough means. I'm like, but like, it's like people are afraid of like showing up and not being enough, and it's so. And you're in a system where it's hyper competitive. I get that there's pressures to it, and so I'm sympathetic to the pressures, but you still got to do things in a good way. And I try to make sure that like I'm giving everyone a fair shake, and that like one thing I do not like about kind of modern American culture, and it's not attacking American culture, it's just my cultural difference being Indigenous, is, I come from a culture that when things are rough, you try and work things out. You go to healing circle, you try to do things in a good way. And it's not as, there's a kind of a fatalism to things that I don't like, because it feels cruel to me. And I sometimes think that when people are in that kind of a cruel system, sometimes they do things that are messed up. I could be sympathetic for it, and it could be because someone has they're not a good person and they don't care about doing things in a good way. And I still hold people accountable to that. But I also think it kind of sucks, because I would be so unhappy if I did that. Like I would be miserable if I didn't create something myself and build it from there. That would break my heart, and that would affect me in a lot of ways. And I think that's it's kind of how I was taught. Like that's like it's kind of like it's about medicine. Like if you take that kind of bad medicine, if you take that kind of stuff, you're going to start getting spiritually sick. You're going to start getting emotionally sick, and it's going to degrade over time. And so I think that's just that stealing that stuff hurts you, and it hurts other people, and it's just not worth doing. I'm not accusing them of stealing, but of course, conceptually, it's not better for anyone, and I don't think people should do it.
Yeah, I agree with that statement.
Well, yeah, because how you treat yourself and how you treat others dictates what you have internally, creatively, and emotionally. And so, if you don't do things in a good way, then you don't have anything. You don't have an inner world to draw from, because you can't be honest with yourself, and you can't look at your life and your actions in a fair way. And without that self-examination, you can't really create, in my opinion. So unless you've got to, if your inside is muddied, then you can't really connect to, that creativity and that energy. And so the idea is you have to, free yourself from that if you want to get to that space. And that's a hard thing to do, especially when you're trying to, because I always try to go, well, imagine not being, because I don't care about fame, but I try to, because I've imagined like once you're at that level and you get used to it, it becomes like a hedonistic treadmill. You're accustomed to that environment, that social thing. All your coping and psychological mechanisms are at that level. So if you drop out of it, you don't know how to live anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's like, you got to be careful with that, because if you're going into that, those are the consequences psychologically, and you got to be sure you're going to be able to cope with it. And I can see how that experience could make people feel desperate.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I think it comes down to pride. I think people with a lot of pride would want to do it their own way.
Well, do it in a good way, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually a saying, and it's because, there's a thing called the seven grandmothers teaching. And one of them is Sabe, which means like Sasquatch. And Sasquatch is actually it's like not a cryptid, it's a spirit in Anishinaabe culture. And one of the sayings is walk tall like Sabe. And that means, and Sabe, it represents honesty. And so the reason Sabe, as Bigfoot, can walk so tall is because it's honest. And without that self-honesty,
Mm.
you just can't walk tall. You can't be proud of anything.
Yeah. But see, look what the result of it is. Blake stole Justin's movie. It looks like Ryan and company stole you guys' life, even your dog. You know, it's you're leaving victims in your path.
And that's the end of episode 2. Episode 3, which will be the rest of this interview, is coming soon. This is Cassidy O'Connell saying stay well. I tell you to stay well because I can never seem to stay well. And stay tuned.